Welcome to the Mad in America podcast, your source for science, psychiatry, and social justice.
Welcome to the Mad in America podcast. My name is Brooke Siem, and I am the author of May Cause Side Effects. Today, I'm here with Rick Fee, who is the president of the Richard Fee Foundation. And we're just going to get straight into it because as we talked about over email, and you and I have met before, neither one of us have letters after our name. So we don't really need to go on a whole academic bio because that's not why we're here, is it?
No, it's not. There's definitely no letters front, behind, or whatever. I guess my thing is at this point is I'm a parent advocate and sharing my son's story because he's not here to tell his own, and with the hopes that it will help others to help them seek a better way to manage their own health care, their own diagnoses, and whatever medicine they may or may not decide to take.
Why don't you introduce us to your son?
Our son, Richard, he was born 1986, first child. And when he came into our lives, it just absolutely changed us immediately. I knew before I became a father, I wanted to be a totally different parent than what my parents were, and wanted to have kids young so we could do things together. And we just had the best time. It was absolutely awesome. He was fun. He was very athletic. He was a smart young man. His sister came along that kind of brought the whole thing together. And Richard was just a very likable kid all the way through high school, college, young man. He was everybody's best friend. It didn't matter to him what status group you were in, whether you were an athlete or whether you were the nerd or whether you were just, the smart kid at the back of the room didn't talk to anybody. He was everybody's friend. He had groups of friends from all those different clique type groups. And he was really big into baseball. He was a really good athlete. And we traveled everywhere, went to baseball games. He played baseball. He played at the highest level he could possibly play up to a point all the way through college. And it was just a great experience. And I loved watching him grow. I loved watching him learn things. I was so proud of him when he went away to school. He was on his own. He was handling everything. He was an honor graduate in high school, presidential scholar at Greensboro College in North Carolina, which is the highest academic award, full ride scholarship based on academics. And he was really set to do some things in his life that he had set up. He had set up goals. He was always really goal oriented, but nothing ever stressed him out. He was very calm. If he was having a bad week at school or a bad game on the field, you couldn't tell. If he just aced the toughest exam in his life, you really wouldn't tell other than he said, yeah, I did pretty good. Not too many ups and downs. And I kind of admired that. And we had a great relationship. We were close. He knew everything about me. I knew everything about him. And it was fantastic until it wasn't.
When did you start noticing that something wasn't quite right? And what did you think was happening versus what was actually happening?
I would have to say we go back to the first time I found out that he was taking Adderall. And that was probably midway through college. Now, being an athlete, you are tested for certain drugs and things like that. So, and the coaches knew what type of prescriptions you were on. And if you tested positive for something that was illegal or wasn't supposed to be in your system, you would be suspended. That was the rules. And he had mentioned to me that he had gotten Adderall because they'd been on a big, long baseball trip and they had finals coming up, and he had gotten Adderall to study all night. I didn't know much about it at the time other than I knew it wasn't good because we're coming off the popularity of Ritalin, and now it's Adderall at that time.
About 2005, 2006-ish?
Yes, you are correct. Yes, he started college in 2004, so we are looking at 2005, 2006. And I told Richard, I said, look, this stuff is not good for you. It's an amphetamine. It's basically legal speed. And it could have some massive bad effects for you. And we had that discussion. It lasted about an hour and it never came up again. And I was confident that none of that was going on because he was randomly tested numerous times and nothing came up in those. So I didn't really think of anything of it again until after college. His goal towards the end of school was, I want to go to medical school. I want to choose a path to where I can help people and change their lives. And that's the path I want to take. Awesome. You've got the grades. You can do it. And he wanted to stay in Greensboro to do this. He had a support group of friends. He loved that area. I noticed some changes in behavior. Things just didn't seem right with him. But it really hit me when he came back home in 2009. So he'd been on his own in Greensboro for a little over a year. And he was still playing baseball, but in an adult league with former college and pro athletes. And I would go down and see him occasionally. And he just didn't, something seemed off. I couldn't put my finger on it. And then he came home. His attitude about his direction was changing. He wasn't as goal oriented or committed. And he started working with me at the shop. I wanted to put him on my insurance through the store. And his insurance application came back from my agent, and he told me, we can't write your insurance because your son, at that time, it was Vyvanse. It started with Vyvanse. Your son's on Vyvanse, and we can't write your group based on that. And I was shocked. And then things started to click. Things started to make sense, that his lack of motivation, not wanting to pursue that goal, not really wanting to be around people like he used to, that all started coming into focus. His staying up late at night, irregular sleep patterns, that started to come into focus once we found that out. And I confronted him with it. And that was kind of the start of the slide. You know, our relationship, which was once great, became strained. There were arguments, verbal confrontations. And as time went on, they escalated from that and became physical. And so that's kind of when that all started just going downhill. All that whole time, we always kept faith and hope that we would be able to change it some way, somehow.
I want to jump a little bit towards the end of Richard's story, because I think it's important to know, for the audience to know what happened to Richard, so we have a lot more context moving forward in the interview and how you're viewing things now, roughly 10 plus years later. So let's jump to the end. How did this end for Richard?
Very briefly, Richard came to the realization, a moment of clarity, where he sat in front of me and said, Dad, something's not right. I need help, which we've been trying for months. I already knew what to do. We took him to the emergency room based on recommendations, tried to get him into a facility to detox, rehab, whatever we needed to do. They made him wait hours. He got antsy. They referred Richard to the rapid response team that dealt specifically with addiction.
He was only addicted to Adderall at this point.
Adderall. Now, previously, you and I discussed about other drugs. In between this whole time, there was a time where he was on Seroquel, he was on Wellbutrin, which didn't last very long. He didn't like those, so those were in and out. But it was Adderall, specifically Adderall at the end. And this rapid response team addiction specialist not only didn't stop his Adderall, they continued it and increased it and gave him prescriptions. Take Adderall in the morning, take Adderall at night. And he was up to taking 90 milligrams a day. And that's way above recommended dosage. And then he was abusing. He was taking lots of it. And the hallucinations, the mood swings, and it just led to the point to where he was put into a psychiatric hospital. They deemed him to be suicidal. They never told us. And then the result of that, That rapid response team kicked Richard to the curb, stopped treating him. He went back to the original doctor who he hadn't seen in 4 months, got another prescription for Adderall, and he was abusing that. And then as that ran out, he ended up hanging himself.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It was quite a shock. He was unresponsive on his phone calls. My wife was always calling him. And we went over to his house. So I was the one that found him. And it was the absolute worst experience of my whole entire life to find him there.
About how long was the period of time when you learned he was on Adderall until he died?
So we are talking about fall of 2009 when he was working with me here at the store to his death in November of 2011. So 2 years. 2 years that Richard wasn't the same person age 24 and 25 that he was the first 23 years of his life. He was totally different.
And so there was a New York Times interview, a massive, massive article that came out on February 2nd, 2013, that outlines Richard's story. And I really encourage everyone to read it, and it gives a fascinating overview of how quickly this got out of control for Richard. And one of the things that I was so struck by, in part because it was sort of similar to my experience, was how many different doctors he saw. And it didn't appear, at least based on the way the article was written, that any one of them ever questioned what was going on. So this wasn't the fault of one prescriber. There were multiple involved.
There was definitely multiple involved, and each one of them would say that Richard was very articulate. He was very smart, didn't present that he was having issues. And he was all of those things. But by that point, he also knew how to manipulate the system because he wanted the Adderall to help as a study drug because that's what he knew of it. And he used what he knew to manipulate the system and became addicted. And even when I started confronting doctors, they still wouldn't help him.
And they wouldn't tell you what was going on either, which on the one hand you understand because of HIPAA, but also because it was through your insurance. That's an interesting blurry line there.
It is an extremely blurry line. And the main doctor here in Virginia Beach that I confronted wouldn't talk to me. I went back and forth with him on numerous occasions. He knew my concerns. He basically told me he wouldn't talk to me because he had been sued before. And this is the same guy that after our first verbal altercation in his lobby room full of patients, I was so frustrated that as I was leaving, I said to him, "You keep giving my son Adderall, you're going to kill him." At that time, he didn't really seem to care. And in other situations with this same doctor, he straight up told me that he knew my son better than I did, which was a very bold statement to make and very untrue. And not one of my favorite people, but typical of a lot of doctors that just prescribe medicines. And in the whole HIPAA law thing, with what happened to Richard, that was my first target of something that I wanted to change. I wanted to change that HIPAA law. So you have these young adults that are on parents' policies to the age of 26. Parents in a life and death situation should be able to get some information for that up to age 26 child until they're out on their own. I understand that part. And we had contacted our state representative, our U.S. congressman, and we were working towards getting in front of Congress to try and get this part of that law changed to where informed consent can be given if there's a life and death situation. And some world crisis happened and that got put on the back burner for whatever reasons. And I hoped that it and wish that that could still happen. But in today's climate, I don't think that is anything that is even possible at this point, considering where all that stuff lies.
I was talking to you before we started recording and saying that I was really glad we were doing the interview now because it's been, a decade since you guys established the Richard Fee Foundation. You've been doing work around this topic and advocacy in honor of Richard's memory, and also hoping that other kids don't end up in his same situation. I want to, we have some hindsight now, so I want to look back. The first question that I have to ask is, what was the prescribers' reactions when they found out Richard had taken his own life? Are they still practicing? Like, what happened with that?
Oh, that is such a good question. I just got cold chills. Now, keep in mind that this psychiatry practice was right across the street from the main entrance to our neighborhood. It is a place that we would see every single day for years after Richard died. And after Richard died, I went in unannounced as I usually would have and demanded to see the doctor. He brought in one of his colleagues to witness the conversation. And I basically had asked him, why were you giving my son Adderall? We had this same conversation. And he could tell that I wasn't right because I was a little bit more subdued. I was kind of like deer in headlights, but I wanted to face him. I wanted to be face to face with him. I didn't want him to find out in the newspaper. I mean, we're talking less than a week after Richard died. I'm in his office. I didn't want him to see an obituary. I wanted him to look me in the eye and tell me why he did what he did. And so we're going along in the conversation, and he asked me, he says, well, how is your son? I said, my son is dead, and you killed him. Absolute silence. The doctor's partner that he brought in to witness looked at him. They both looked at him. And then all of a sudden, this doctor was so very compassionate, appeared to be, but he was only trying to cover his ass. And that conversation ended. I didn't really get out of it what I wanted, what I felt I needed out of that, other than the fact that I was face to face with him and I wanted him to hear it from me. And so I left. And I could tell by his tone of voice and the look on his partner's face that they were pretty concerned. But my wife and I, we were beat. We lost the fight. We lost the major fight for our son's life at that point. And I didn't want to fight anymore. We were just lost for such a long period of time until the whole New York Times article came about. And that changed everything.
This level of media coverage is, I mean, honestly, I don't even know if it would happen today. I wanted to ask you if you thought the New York Times would write that same article today.
No, they would not. As a matter of fact, in working with Alan, we worked with him for months on this article. I saw Alan on MSNBC or CNN, one of those two things. They were doing an ADHD Adderall type of interview. Alan was in a series of ADHD articles at that time in the New York Times. And Tamara Hall made a joke about, well, I better make sure I keep my Adderall locked up in my medicine cabinet so my dog doesn't get it. I was in my store. I was walking past a TV that we have on just as background noise. I heard this, stopped me dead in my tracks. And I was like, the audacity of that woman to make that kind of joke. And we're talking almost 2 years later. And I found a way to get a hold of Alan. And this is how this whole thing happened. The article took months and months and months to write. And Alan told me, he said, this is one of the biggest articles that we are ever going to put in here as far as content and length. I'll never forget this. Alan called me and he said, I've never done this with anybody I've ever written an article with or about, but I have to tell you this. The article's being released tomorrow, February 2nd, 2013, as you mentioned. And it is front page above the fold. And your son's picture from graduation is front and center on the front page of the New York Times. I'm like, oh my God. I was away at a trade show in between venues, and I'm just sitting out there in the freezing cold, just having this conversation. I'll never forget this. It was absolutely surreal to me that I'm hearing this. And still I'm hearing it, but I don't know what to expect. I check out of my hotel at 4:30 the next morning. On the counter at the hotel checkout, who do I see? I don't see the clerk checking me out. I see my son. It was a reality check. And I'm like, my God, Alan warned me the day before. He says, this article's going to hit. Your phone is going to go crazy. You're going to be inundated with so many things. And I'm like, yeah, there's no way. That's not happening. He says, you just wait. If you need any help kind of feeling your way through this, I'm there for you. And we developed a pretty close relationship during this whole process, and we still stay in touch somewhat. And I had to travel through a couple different airports that day, and every newsstand I passed, I would see my son follow me the way home. And it was like we were walking through the airports coming back from a ski trip together that we had done numerous times. It was really intense. I mean, I was a wreck by the time I got home. And I walked in the door. My wife says, you won't believe what's been happening. I was like, oh my God. So from that point on, it's like, all right, here we go. That is when we realized the impact of what happened to Richard and how it could help other people and what it would mean. So we need to talk about this more. We need to do some of these things that these people are coming to us to talk about. We have never been really outspoken and out in the public. I've never been a public speaker. Matter of fact, getting up in front of a crowd of 5 people talking, scared to living bejeebies out of me. And we just felt this need that Richard always said he wanted to help people. This is his way of still being able to do what his goal was. But he's doing it through us now, telling his story. The people that contacted us, just off the New York, just individuals, not to mention all the news companies, the national TV shows and all that stuff, which we did some. We were very selective in what we did. I wouldn't do any tabloid media type stuff. I stayed away from any of that. Didn't want any part of that. But we got phone calls and emails from people. There was a lady called in, sent me an email saying that her daughter was going through the same thing. Saw the article. Can we help her? Numerous conversations back and forth. We got her daughter the help. To this day, she credits hearing Richard's story to saving her daughter's life. We got a phone call from a gentleman 3 months after the article saying, I was traveling with my daughter. We were in a remote area in the Northeast and pulled into a gas station. Saw the newspaper sitting on the counter. 3 months later, he told me that article saved my daughter. And that's just 2 examples. Brooke, there are hundreds and hundreds of these things. And to us, it is awesome. And Kathy handled all that in the beginning. I wasn't strong enough to really deal with all that. She was handling those things. I would get involved when she got kind of overwhelmed with some things. But it just has evolved. And the people, I like getting the feedback back from, this is Richard's story is inspiration. It helped. And it gives it purpose to have us continue to keep going forward to tell his story. But you did ask me a question, and is he still practicing? Now, as another result of this New York Times article, and I'm saying that this thing is life changing. It has been life changing. Another part of this New York Times article, the Virginia State Medical Board got a hold of it. We did not pursue any type of legal activities against these doctors. We didn't have the fight in us to do it. The Virginia State Medical Board saw the article. They came to us. They interviewed us for 4 hours. They brought up the 2 main doctors on charges. One doctor, the main doctor that I was telling you that we spent most of the time talking about, he had his license taken away. He stopped practicing. That caused a massive exit of clients from his practice. It caused an exit of the other 10 to 15 other partners to leave that practice because now the name of that practice is tainted. Nobody wants to go there. He still isn't practicing, never got his license back. He's in probably his late 70s by now. And that building was tore down a few years ago.
Oh, thank God.
I love seeing that empty lot because that was a absolute building of horrors. So that was his end result. And this gentleman did not present himself well in his defense at the state medical board. I testified at that also. There were two other people that were there testifying against him as well. And the second doctor, who was the rapid response team doctor, was very articulate, very smooth. He was the one saying that it was basically Richard's fault. He was tricked because Richard was so well educated, he got fooled. It's tragic it happened, but I got fooled. He was slapped on the wrist and given continuing education, and he's still in practice to this day. His therapist in his office that was seeing Richard and Kathy, she ended up resigning from his practice. And this is a person that I knew through my store because they were customers in our store. She resigned based on what had happened. So one practice completely shut down, building tore down, and the other guy slapped on the wrist, but he continued to do what he was doing prior.
What I think is so valuable about the New York Times article, and why I wish every kid, parent, and doctor needed to read it, is when people push back against these types of things, they usually say, oh, this is rare. It's very rare that someone has this extreme of a reaction. And most people are fine. Most people are not, going into psychosis because of their ADHD drugs. But the reason why this article I think is so vitally important is because it is so detailed in the timeline, and you can see the progression. So no matter where your loved one or you are on the spectrum of you're just taking one Adderall every once in a while because you're trying to study better, to this has become a really big problem. It outlines exactly the path that Richard took. And so I think that when it comes to people who say their lives have been saved by this, it's because they read that article, and the article showed them where they were in the process before it got really bad.
The doctors are supposed to go through a protocol. They're supposed to get family involvement. They're supposed to get family history. They don't do that. I think all they want to do is just push drugs, psychiatric drugs, ADHD, all of them, for all of them. And maybe they're not trained that well anymore, but they don't look at lifestyle. They don't look at exercise. They don't look at sleep patterns, stress levels, what the diet is. All these are contributing factors. Get to the root of the problem before you start giving medication. And I put a lot of blame on the insurance companies, because the way that psychiatrists in particular are paid, a med check appointment is on the books 15 minutes that the insurance company will pay the doctor for. But these med check appointments last 5 to 7 minutes. So instead of getting paid for 4 appointments in an hour, they're getting paid for 10 more, depends on how quick. Richard's documents showed that he was in and out within 5 minutes, sometimes 7 minutes on these med check appointments. And they're getting paid X amount of dollars for each one. They're multiplying what they're getting paid. And that's the insurance company set that up. So that's how the doctor's going to maximize their earning potential in those situations. It's not about care. How many people can I push in and out? And that first doctor had that reputation. I had so many friends that I found afterwards that went to him and had the same issues. It's just amazing. And you look at the prescription amounts that are given. In Alan's article, he had mentioned, and from 2007 to 2011, it increased like 250%, 14 million prescriptions. When we did a recent broadcast, the prescription amounts are now went from 2019, 35.5 million prescriptions up to 45 million prescriptions in 2022. So look how much that's multiplied just since Richard has died. It is absolutely mind-boggling to me that it still continues.
So why don't you think the New York Times would write this article today? Because I agree, I don't think they would, and it's bizarre to me how much this has shifted away from responsibility or liability.
My true gut feeling as to why that article wouldn't be written now is how powerful Big Pharma is. how much influence they have over the whole medical profession. The doctors aren't in charge of it. No possible way. Big pharma is in charge of the medical profession. And they're going to push their drugs. That's where they make their money. They don't care who gets hurt. They pull the puppet strings. There's no way that the New York Times would write that. They would get too much backlash. I would imagine, I don't know for a fact, but I would imagine that there's quite a bit of dollar spend in advertising in the New York Times. I mean, you turn on your TV, how many prescription drugs commercials do you see? That's most of the TV commercials. That's all big pharma just pushing that out. It's too big of an influence. Really hoping that Robert Kennedy can come in and make some changes based on what he wants to do with his Make America Healthy Again. I think there's some great opportunities. I don't care what political party you are. If you're not behind some of the things that he wants to do to make the country healthy again, then you aren't paying attention.
All right, so let's pivot to what are you guys doing about this? Tell me about the Richard V. Foundation and what you guys have been doing over the past few years to share Richard's story, make change.
Well, over the years, there have been numerous TV appearances, a lot early on, some more recently. I feel whether it's a local outlet to talk about Richard's story or an opportunity to be with a reputable national broadcast or personality to talk about it, we've seized pretty much every opportunity that we thought would present Richard's story in a good light to get the message that we want to put out in Richard's memory. So there's a bunch of those. There's been newspaper articles. A lot of it comes to us. We usually don't pursue a lot of those. But the foundation is also trying to get a platform together. And a big example of that was the Virginia Beach Medicating Normal event where you and I first met.
Yes. I've been very lucky to have participated in now 2 events with you guys. And I think in the Virginia Beach event, it was in your guys' hometown. So I think the audience was very familiar comparatively with Richard's story and the reason why we were there. But out here, when we did the event at the University of Nevada, we had a packed room. There were hundreds of people. It was standing room only in there. And you were the first person to say anything about what was about to happen. You changed the energy of that entire room. And in my view, it was kind of the oh shit moment. You could tell, you could feel it in that room that everyone in there was like, oh shit, we're about to be taught something really important that we didn't know. And that was so cool for me to see, even though it was uncomfortable, because that between the screening and Bob talking, like that was an engaged room of professionals. And I was just so thrilled to have you guys here.
It was a very good opportunity to come out there. And my approach now is I'm just going to tell people the way it is. I mean, that's what I feel about it in a respectful way, but I'm going to give my opinion, my thoughts. They're my thoughts. You can figure out what part of my thoughts that you like or that you want to back check, research, or whatever. But I'm going to give my true feelings. I'm not really holding anything back, but doing it in as a respectful manner as possible to hopefully have the biggest impact. And I kind of took a little bit of that approach for Reno, kind of based on the way you came up and you spoke in Virginia Beach. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I said, yeah, I got to kind of change. I got to do a little bit more of what Brooke's doing a little bit. That is the goal, trying to move this thing forward. And then to do what you guys did in Reno on the college campus. I think that's key. It's got to be, your format was extremely good. It was condensed much more than ours. So I learned a lot from that event. And to do something in that type of scenario where you have the captive audience of the psychological department, the psychiatry department, students, other faculty, and all the people from outside, get the general public in, and to do it on the campuses, if I could get the state involved, Then we can have like a traveling thing going from one college to the next college to the community college, all the state funded schools. That is my goal. That is our foundation's goal, to get that and replicate that and take that in other places. And that Reno event really taught me that it can be done in that format and done very successfully. But the other things that the Richard Fee Foundation does on a very local scale, and this is true and core to who Richard really was, is we do fundraisers. We have events like all small charities in a small town. We do the golf tournaments and we raise money, and that's our big money maker. We fund college scholarships. We do 3 college scholarships at Richards High School every year. And these students can go trade school, college, university, wherever. We're going to give them money for their first year. But we also do baseball camps. We have underprivileged kids that have never seen a baseball field, and we send 10 to 30 kids every year to Old Dominion University in Norfolk to go to a baseball camp. Because when Richard was 10 years old, he went to a week-long baseball camp there also. And we wanted to provide that opportunity to them in Richard's memory so they could experience the fun of getting out on a baseball field and play. And we do that every year. It is so heartwarming for my wife and I. My daughter comes out, she takes pictures and of all the kids and the events. And it's just nice to see the smile on these kids' faces who've never seen a baseball field, never even knew that university had a baseball complex that was less than 15 minutes from where they live. And it's really cool to sit there and talk with them at the end of their week, see how much fun they had, how grateful they were. And I knew Richard would love that. I knew he would just be smiling and say, "Oh, these kids are great." And it just really makes us happy. And then at Richards College, Greensboro College, there's a fully endowed scholarship in his name that will be given out in Richard's name for as long as there's a Greensboro College. That school gave a lot to Richard in terms of the full ride, the opportunity to play baseball. And he really flourished there the 4 years he was there. And it's good that is offered there in his name. So those are the smaller things we're doing, but we have a big plan, big goals. And it's a big team of people that are involved in our foundation. Kathy and I couldn't do it alone. I know I certainly couldn't. But there's a really close group of friends that are involved in this with us. And yeah, we love all those guys.
So what's a good ask here? Because you've got fairly large audience of probably the most dedicated and understanding group of people on the planet and that in America who are going to listen to this. I'm sure there's somebody out there who has an in at a college or something. Like, is there anything you want to ask this audience that you might be able to take advantage of?
That's exactly the thought. Opportunities. That's what we all need, right? We need opportunities. No matter what part of our life we're looking about, we need opportunities to be successful. And for Richard's story to still be successful, we would love opportunities to get out and talk about what he went through, what it eventually cost him and our family, and just being able to speak so people would actually be able to learn from it and hopefully make a change in their own life or a change in one of their family members or friends that they see is going through it. So just getting in front of people and telling the story as much as we can to people that would really want and appreciate the opportunity. And we would love an opportunity. It doesn't matter where, when. I mean, you know by now, I'll pretty much go anywhere.
For anybody out there who might be considering maybe bringing the foundation and or medicating normal or just an event to their town, when we did it here at the university, we got it fully set up for continuing education credits. So it's very much something that is beneficial from a CEU credit opportunity for both current practitioners and also future doctors. So just do it. Just reach out. Do an event.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I think that'd be my big ask.
All right. As our closing question, I know unfortunately you're not the only parent out there who has gone through this. What words do you have for any other parents out there who are feeling pretty lonely?
Well, so that reminds me, I got an email 2 weeks ago from a lady here in Virginia Beach. Simple one line to our foundation. My son lost his life to Adderall addiction. And I reached out to her and sent her an email talking to her. And she is currently in the same boat that Kathy and I were those first 2 years, just lost, confused, no direction, no will to really do much of anything except just survive day to day, survive at your job that you have to do, survive to provide for kids that you still have in the home. And this woman is exactly the same way. Her son was 31 years old and died in her arms of a cardiac arrest. That's actually how I thought Richard would die, was a cardiac arrest based on what I was witnessing with my eyes, not knowing the background of the suicidal thoughts because we were never told that. We learned that afterwards, of course. But her story was the exact same story. Very well educated, smart, talented, and started taking Adderall in college and became addicted, and it ended his life. The sad thing about it is the story doesn't change. It's the people in the story keep changing, and there isn't enough to stop it. So my feelings on it are that parents that are in the midst of going through something like this, whether it's Adderall or any other type of psychiatric type of drug, to contact anybody that they think may help. It may be another doctor, it may not be. It may be somebody influential in the person's life that's going through this that might be able to get through. A really good friend, a mentor, or a coach that could probably make headway. Family just needs to realize, reach out to whoever you can reach out to. Anybody is more than welcome to reach out to us at the foundation, and we would do anything and everything we possibly can to put them in contact with people. And we've done that numerous times. I just wish there were more resources to send people to. In certain areas, there are none. Some areas, there's a couple. We have been referring a lot of people to Dr. Gretchen Watson and others, but mainly her here. But just reach out to anybody. I mean, you have to realize, and I didn't realize this soon enough. Well, I guess I did know I was fighting for his life. I just didn't know it was going to end the way it did. But you're in a fight to have this person that you love survive. It doesn't matter who you reach out. You reach out to anybody and everybody, and bring people in, whether it's us, whether it's doctors, whatever. Use all resources possible to do that.
I think that's an amazing suggestion that I've never really heard anybody make before. And part of the reason why I think it's so important is because, like, for me, yes, I was on a bunch of drugs that had been prescribed to me when I was a kid, and I wasn't doing well on them, but I still was my mother's daughter, and there was still an element of shame for what was happening, and I knew, like, I didn't want to hurt her anymore, and I also didn't want to admit that I wasn't doing well, even though she knew, right? But, like, that was me trying to keep a distance with her, because there's something about the parent-child relationship that, as open as it can be, there's also a lot of complicated energy there. And so to have somebody from the outside who the person trusts come in, I can really, really see where that could move the needle, whereas the parent couldn't, just because the child, at the end of the day, still just wants to please their parents. But if they don't know how to fix whatever's going on, they might pull away.
You're exactly right. I'd have to say, being the parent in this scenario, and I have never talked about this before. I have some deep down regrets that I wish I had followed through with. In Richard's case, there were two people I was going to reach out to. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do this. One was his high school baseball coach. They had an interesting relationship, but Richard respected this man like no other. I was going to reach out to him and have him help. But I thought to myself, if I do this, Richard will never forgive me. It will embarrass him. There was another person of similar stature in our lives, a mentor to me, but somebody who knew Richard as well ever since he was a baby. I was going to reach out to him. Same thing. If I do this, Richard's going to be so embarrassed. I'll be putting his dirty laundry out. Well, I've got what ifs. I don't want anybody to have what ifs. So that's why I say bring in anybody and everybody that can make a difference, because you don't want to sit there at the end with a tragic loss and have a what if.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You probably just saved a whole bunch of lives with that.
I've thought that for years. I've never spoken that to anybody.
Thank you. I adore you guys so much. Can't wait to see you again. And thank you so much for sharing all this with the audience and with me.
Oh, well, thank you. And here, this is one of those opportunities. So I appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, it'll take me a couple of days to get over this. I think we briefly talked about this before, these big events and things like that. I get all worked up and then I got to decompress after a couple of days. But as hard as it is to get up and talk and to do these things, the benefit that somebody may get out of it is worth every little bit of emotion and discomfort that we have to go through. And it's doing Richard's work. It's doing what he wanted to do. And I do really appreciate the opportunity, and it's great to see you.
See you too. Tell Kathy hello and thank you as well.
I will definitely do that.
Thank you for listening to the Mad in America podcast. For more news, views, and updates, visit madinamerica.com.